Lagoon 38, the youngest model among the Lagoons. I didn't just decide to spend almost an hour of your time on just one catamaran model for no reason. I understand that in the modern world, people are ready to go to great lengths for even smaller offenses. But it is precisely with this example that I want to show the current trends in cruise catamaran construction. My name is Kirill Shelukin, and you probably already know that when it comes to technical issues related to boats, I understand a bit more than the average housewife. And for those who don't know, well, let me inform you that I've been involved in yachting almost my entire life, and commercially since 2008. In short, I have the experience. But here I was a bit taken aback myself. The question is simply, in fact, well, worthy of being discussed a bit longer than just throwing out specifications from a promotional brochure. Because to be honest, I don't care about the technologies used in production, although of course I will talk about them as well. I don't care about what the salespeople tell you there. That's a whole separate topic. I don't even care about the environmental footprint, which, well, the Greens like to lie about, for example. The most important thing here is to understand why a particular model, which at one time truly became a legend, suddenly just disappeared. Just like that, they stopped producing it without any explanations at all. And you can't say that the child was stillborn from the start. No. This was a market flagship which some fans are still hunting for, which is still sold on the secondary market without any issues, and which, by working absolutely successfully in charter, could provide its owner with completely predictable profitability. And this is the Lagoon 380, a model that was produced for almost 20 years without changes, and with which many began their journey into the world of catamarans. Don't worry, this video is actually about what the brand new 2025 model of the same catamaran is like, and what solutions it incorporates. But before diving into this technical nonsense, just to understand everything, we need to delve a little into the context of what was before and what exists now. Because if I just list the technical specifications, you won't completely understand what I wanted to convey with this entire video, and I will indeed frequently compare what they have released now with what was before in order to provide a more comprehensive and clearer picture. I will also be making up a lot of things that, in my personal opinion, the authors intended. That's just how I was taught in school, to look for what the author wanted to say, even if they didn't intend to say it at all. And most importantly, don't jump to conclusions until you've watched everything to the end. After all, the 380 Lagoon is a legend, not just some nobody. Well, or draw conclusions and write in the comments because, well, where would I be without your most important opinion in the world? In short, over the next 40-50 minutes or thereabouts, I'll tell you almost everything. From the history of the model with my speculations and legends, to the complete rebirth of this phoenix in the year 2025 in an absolutely transformed form. Well, as always, with some financial calculations and my personal analysis of the charter market. In short, here it is, the Lagoon 38 from the Beneteau Group. A new model from the year 25, specifically closing the budget catamaran segment in this brand's lineup. Meet it, and for now, let's immediately forget about it, because for the next few minutes we will be talking about a completely different boat, although with the same name and even the same size. And all this is to understand something very important that many overlook when discussing the market of modern yachts, or catamarans as their subtype. So, back in 1999, the Lagoon 380 appeared on the market, the first mass-produced catamaran model for cruising yachting. It seemed like just another catamaran, one of the smallest in its class, not the most expensive, not the cheapest, with questionable design solutions at that time, but for some reason it became the people's catamaran. It really appeared at all charter docks around the world, from Thailand to Greece. And it just took off in the world of cruising catamarans. And with all this success, there's one mystery. Why did they stop producing the Lagoon 380 for as long as 5 years? Of course, one could throw in the standard theories about COVID, global instability. Well, who would doubt that? But in fact, other brands and other models only strengthened their position in the market during this time. And the queue for new catamarans, even in the most crisis-ridden year, is actually longer than for the Champions League final. Here are just a few examples from leaders who decided in those years that the battle for the market was far from lost. Bali was the first to enter the market with new catamarans, with the Bali 4.0 in 2015. Again, Nautitech 40 Open in 2015. Then Fountaine Pajot with their Lucia 40 in 2016, Seawind 1190 in 2016. Even Lagoon decided to dive into this niche of 40-foot models in 2017. and released their new Lagoon 40. There was also the Bali 4.1 in 2018, and then the trend started to decline. Seacat 37 joined them in 2018. They were practically asking the market if models below 40 feet were still liked by people, and the market did like them. Then XS released the 12th model in 2019 and followed it, with the lower 11th model in 2020. Fountaine Pajot does not change its sizes and releases their 40th model in 2022. But clearly, the trend went down, and Bali, having already captured a significant part of the market, makes another leap by releasing its junior model, namely the Cut Smart in the 38-foot size in 2023. In general, we have a lot to talk about in the future, but for now, let's return to the Lagoon 380. You look at the reality and think, yes, they created a legend and suddenly decided to completely stop production. Well, something here clearly doesn't add up. And it would be understandable if the shipyard went under or in a fit of stagnation was sold to someone, and the new owners decided to change the model lineup. But no, that wasn't the case. Lagoon belongs to one of the most successful yacht builders in the world, namely the Beneteau Group. And to be honest, even in the toughest years, they didn't seem to have any problems. It's more likely something else. Recently, I went to inspect one of those very Lagoon 380s. Well, I hope you remember that my partners and I are involved in selecting and assisting with yacht purchases. And this was exactly such a trip. The Lagoon 380 of the second generation, which means the S2 model, was the last in this series, ending production in 2019. The boat was sturdy, reliable, and relatively new from 2016. But for a modern cruising catamaran, I ended up on it not for the first time, and I remembered, well, it's really tiny. You can neither breathe nor move. And it was produced, and most importantly, it was bought. I, of course, rejected this particular boat. Well, there was a significant mismatch between the price and its condition. But overall, it was on this very boat, precisely when I got there, that the idea to make this video came to mind. Because at some point, this model started to stand out significantly from the market, and not in a good way. Yet, despite all this, people continued to buy it, and its price kept increasing. In hindsight, well, I can explain just about anything. But there was a moment when even the sellers themselves didn't understand why their product was being bought in such a state. Obviously, it's hard to convince yourself to modernize something if it's already selling well, with a waiting list several years long. But when it's the year 2019 and the Laguna looks like a piece of junk from the 90s, well, that's very strange for a market flagship. And essentially, that's how it was. It was designed back in the 90s, released in 99, and underwent a very minimal restyling in 2003. And that's it. The S2 was produced all the way until 2019. Well, yes, at that time it was top-notch, but the years go by. And meanwhile, by 2016, the Bali 4.0 had already been in production for 2 years. Yes, in its base version it was, well, maybe about 20% more expensive. But honestly, even back then, I strongly realized that this would be some kind of new trend in catamaran building. It's understandable that we tend to approach everything new with caution. Well, that's how evolution has programmed us. And discussing this new concept from Bali had to be done very cautiously. There are always things that shape a new world, but most new ideas are born and die without ever taking off. So in 2016, Bali was precisely a completely new brand, with an entirely new concept. Yes, from the well-known katana, but the market had never seen anything like this before. Everything was raw and untested by the sea. Because even if in 2016 I already felt that the entire catamaran world was changing, then it certainly should have reached them as well. Well, just compare this with that, and don't start telling me about sporty lines. The market doesn't care about them at all. In charter, even if you sail back, as long as everyone on board is comfortable, then it's all good. But as I already mentioned, the Lagoon 380 was being bought, and it was really being bought because it's a legend, because it's proven, because everyone is buying it. And it's hard for a manufacturer to be objective when you're a legend and sales are going well. But the market is what it is, and at some point, a critical mass of objections accumulates. And suddenly one day you abruptly turn from a leader into an outsider who slept through their revolution. Well, just look at Nokia and Siemens, and believe me, legends also die. In short, realizing that while they were enjoying their triumph, the whole world had long since surpassed them. In 2019, Laguna got upset and decided probably not to release their legendary 380 model anymore. And remember, I said that we need to understand something very important. And now I will try to explain it all to you. The world does not tolerate emptiness. And even if you were the best 100 times over in the past, you will be forgotten almost instantly. And so 5 years have passed. The world has changed. The pandemic has shaken the market. Bali has firmly established itself in the charter. This is already the new standard. New clients have started choosing not traditions, but comfort and space. Lagoon has been methodically losing the market for all 5 years. And this is exactly the time period when the charter fleets are completely renewed. And for many, this happened not with a model from Lagoon, but with a model from a competitor. And tada, the legendary 38th model has reappeared in Lagoon's lineup. The main thing is to do everything on time, guys. That seems to be your motto. I hope everyone understands that this new 38th model has absolutely nothing in common with the previous versions, and it should be considered as an entirely new concept. Well, I mean, they didn't come up with anything new. All the competitors have been releasing such things for a long time. But when we take and compare it with the same Lagoon 380, which they stopped producing in 2019, that is, with the same model but the previous one. And firstly, the main curse of this old version has disappeared. It was a rather dark and stuffy interior that needed a lot of ventilation. Instead of an old water cottage, there is now a bright, spacious area, panoramic glazing, proper ventilation, and ergonomics, and that seem to have been designed by very thoughtful people. Secondly, the eternal compromise of the cabin has disappeared. Those who sailed on the old 380 remember well how narrow the beds were and the strange shelves. Well, everything seemed economized. Now there are normal dimensions and good mattresses. Even the closets have finally become convenient rather than just symbolic storage. The deck layout has also changed. All those steps, the cramped cockpit, the transition with different levels. Now everything is perfectly even. A large flybridge, and that's the main thing. A large relaxation area, a spacious bow, and again a whole lounge area is made there. Everything is now in the spirit of that very new concept, which, by the way, Bali introduced, not Lagoon, to this market, and maximum open space with a minimum of steps. The kitchen is no longer hidden away in a corner. It has become part of the overall space. There is a proper refrigerator, a full cooking surface, and plenty of storage space. In general, it's not a galley, but a normal human kitchen. And here you are standing on this new Lagoon 38, and honestly, you can't believe it's the same model, because now it truly competes with Bali rather than lagging 2 evolutionary steps behind. And now, overall, I've practically told you everything. But the guys from Beneteau Group tell a completely different story. So why should you buy their catamaran? So let's start with those innovations that Beneteau Group is grandly placing at the forefront of cruising catamaran construction in 2025. And honestly, let's quickly lay out all the facts. Namely, let's check the compliance of all their production with the green agenda and eco-activism. And as far as I'm concerned, there's definitely no compliance. Well, it's understandable if you compare all this to their own first model and the second one too, which didn't have a gram of eco-resin or hemp fiber. But even with the complete absence of all these eco-materials, those catamarans cause less harm to the environment than the new bio-friendly version. And don't rush to throw shoes at me. I'll explain where the catch is. If you dig deeper, it turns out that this whole bio story only concerns non-structural elements. So by green resins, they mean only small things like furniture, panels, interior elements. Basically anything that doesn't bear a load. And now attention. Such elements make up about 12 to 15% of the total volume of resins on the entire board. And only a portion of them has been replaced with bioresins. And considering that the bioresins themselves are not entirely bound, but only about 60 to 70% made from biomaterials, the net result is that the share of this whole eco-story in the total volume of resins used is about 7% of the mass of all the resin content. The rest is the same polyester as before. Well, what can you do if that's the current agenda and the hulls need to be strong? Even all the extensive and comprehensive independent tests show that hemp bioresin composites significantly lose in strength compared to the most ordinary polyester fiberglass in various testing environments. And if you add to this the weak resistance to aggressive environments and the reduced lifespan, well, I think it's not worth making a hard top from this material. For those who didn't know, at sea, all of this is considered aggressive environment. And now let's look further. The Lagoon 38 from 1999 weighed on average 6.5 tons, while the 2025 model weighs about 10 and 2 tons. So it's almost 60% heavier. And here you start to calculate how much more harm does each catamaran actually cause. And it turns out to be about 1.5 times more. Well, it's clear, right? Despite all this eco-friendly design, the absolute amount of regular resins and synthetic materials is significantly greater. It's logical. The hull is bigger, there are more reinforcements, more superstructures, more bottom. The engines, well, they're not the most modern and eco-friendly either. By the way, in my humble opinion, that's more of a plus than a minus, but we'll talk about them later. Overall, for those who think like Greta Thunberg rather than with their head, this model is much more attractive than its direct competitors in this market who don't have a gram of eco-resin at all. And personally, I don't understand this at all. How did this populism manage to penetrate so deeply into the masses? So you're selling a catamaran, by the way, a very well-made catamaran, to people who somehow earned those 350,000, and you seriously start spouting all this nonsense. It would be better to talk about how easy it will be to own this catamaran, whether in a charter or personally. How luxurious apartments with premium design fit into minimal dimensions. Talk about the classic engines without the common rail and electronic throttle that have driven everyone crazy. Well, talk about the automatic jib and the super efficient mainsail, about the ease of single-handed operation, the innovative hull shape, the fact that even in this size there is at least a minimal flybridge and solar panels. And of course about the business model for which this catamaran was designed. People will be interested. Well, in short, that's exactly what I want to convey to you in this video. Let's say this will be a promo video for Lagoon, but not from Lagoon. And if you watch this video carefully, you will get all this information. There is a popular story on the internet that supposedly Lagoon was the first to start making those very catamarans that we consider classics today, with a cockpit there at the back with 2 hulls, cabins, and a central salon. They say that they were the ones who invented everything, set the trend, and the others followed. Honestly, it sounds nice, but as is often the case, the truth is a bit less romantic. In fact, the pioneers in this field were not the French, but the British. Yes, indeed. As early as 1970, the proud Snow Goose 35 was launched, a catamaran that in design already resembled completely modern models. Of course, not without nuances. The shapes were simpler, the width narrower, and the comfort more modest. But the essence was 2 hulls, a central salon, and a cockpit at the back. That's it. That was already available back then. The French followed suit, and in 1983, Fountaine Pajot released the Louisiana 37. At that time, it was also quite a classic catamaran, but with an improved layout. It featured a slightly more modern design and a step towards comfort. In essence, it was the first serious step towards mass catamaran production in Europe. However, Lagoon joined this race much later, only in 1990, when Jeannot, a well-known shipbuilder in Europe, decided not to lag behind its competitors and released its own catamaran model. Quite logical, considering the trends of that time. By the way, if now a boat of 37, 38 feet is considered a junior model, almost an entry ticket into the world of catamarans, back then 37 feet was the largest production catamaran you could buy. By 1995, Jeannot had already been absorbed by the Beneteau Group, and accordingly, Lagoon, along with it, came under the wing of one of the largest yachting holdings in the world. And yes, if you didn't know, for 30 years now, Jeannot and Beneteau are 2 competing brands owned by the same company. And then in 1999, the very Lagoon 380 appeared, a model that everyone knows now. Well, if not personally, then from photos, like on charter websites. I mean, those who are passionate about yachting have always come across this model, because it became the symbol of the mass catamaran in the 2000s. So spacious, reliable, with an understandable layout, and a sea of reviews all over the internet. And then until 2003, no changes, a restyling, and of course a cult status that many still feel nostalgic about. Personally, I don't feel it. So no, Lagoon were not the first, but they were definitely the ones who managed to jump on the right train at the right time and set the standard. Yes, they didn't invent the cruising catamaran, but they made it mainstream, convenient, and in some sense accessible. And let's be honest, that is worth a lot. Now let's talk a little about construction and technology. In those years, the use of polyester resins and vacuum infusion in yacht building was already in full swing. But if anyone thinks that the technologies were well tested, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Industrial production back then was not much different from garage level in terms of product quality and consistency. It was during those years that legends began to circulate about unformed plastic, rigging fasteners without inserts, and furniture detaching from the hull, and Lagoon was no exception in this regard. More precisely, it was the rule. In reality, the technologies were refined for several more years, but this did not prevent it from being a market leader, or rather, from creating its new market of charter cruising catamarans. Lagoon quickly fine-tuned all the technological processes and was able to produce consistently functioning units. With two, it was already a stable model. Initially, the successful solution with the steering column slightly above the main deck, while not taking up space in the very safe cockpit, the ability to manage all this single-handedly, well, almost single-handedly, and a rather large galley in the salon with almost panoramic glazing, and also almost on the same level as the cockpit. All this, spacious cabins, well, for that time, of course, full height layout. Let's be honest. Almost everyone who tried sailing on such a catamaran in those years began to consider it a benchmark. It was simply convenient. Other manufacturers experimented with layouts, the placement of steering wheels, sails, but almost everyone was influenced by the existing Lagoon. And for a while, it seemed that this was the maximum that could be achieved in the 38-foot size. Well, this size can't turn into some kind of modern G-Wagon of such dimensions. After all, it's a sailboat. But something went wrong. The year 2015 comes, and the unknown Bali suddenly releases an extremely awkward machine, which ultimately overturned the entire concept of catamaran building. Meanwhile, Lagoon decided not to change anything at all. At that moment, it seemed like they just turned away from what was happening, neither responding to the challenge nor breaking the established concept. Perhaps, of course, they thought that the hype would pass and the classic would remain, but the market showed that times have changed, and it was truly time to act. Practically, it took Lagoon 10 years to restructure and realize what exactly was missed, and now they are starting to catch up somehow. Honestly, I am absolutely convinced that a catamaran around 38 feet today simply must be the flagship of any shipyard. Well, for those that of course want to mean something in the charter business. And yes, I can even explain my words, so let's put the past aside and see how Lagoon is being produced today. Let's start with the main thing, the design and layout. With the old Lagoon 380, let's say, it was, well, modest. Inside it's rather dark. Everything seems like it's from a 90s catalog. Corners, partitions, plywood furniture, and a cozy cottage-like feel. But times have changed, and the new Lagoon 38 looks completely different. The design bureau, by the way, hasn't changed at all. That is, it was made by the same guys as in '99. So, there's no point in blaming them at all. Let's better see what they've come up with in the new model. Maybe they learned something new, maybe they took some inspiration, but the most important thing is that they managed to move away from their old snobbery, so to speak. So, the salon and cockpit are now a single space under a full hardtop. Very high, meaning you have to reach up. Yes, it's a junior model, and the hardtop here is still a kind of hybrid thing. A bit of a mini flybridge, a bit of solar panels, a bit of shade. But it's wonderful. It comes as standard when purchasing, and this indicates that comfort and practicality are no longer optional. Now it's standard. Personally, I went a lot, for example, to the younger Bali models, and I just didn't like their lift-up door despite its visual coolness. And in terms of operation, well, honestly, it's not the best, especially if the weather changes suddenly and you want to close it. But the sliding door, like the 3-section one on the Laguna, is truly a brilliant solution. It works like clockwork. It doesn't break, doesn't interfere with the salon or the cockpit, and can be easily closed by one person. The doors neatly retract into the space behind the binnacle and refrigerators, leaving the rest of the space, the opening, free. The kitchen and sofas are designed in such a way that nothing prevents turning it all into a dance floor. And believe me, on 38 feet, this is quite a rarity. In general, the fewer partitions, tables, and visual noise, the less clutter there is. Don't confuse it with lockers. A locker is a good thing. But little things like mugs, bottles, spread out swimsuits, chargers, packs of cigarettes, and random IQOS devices scattered on every shelf, that's a problem. And the new design is just perfect for countering this. The cockpit now extends almost to the aft ends of the floats, ending with a huge sofa. And this is already the norm. Maximum usable space with the same dimensions is the standard of the new school. Well, unless of course you consider, say, leopards. In general, it's comfortable to sit here, cook, and sail. Almost everything is convenient, even parking. The salon, well, has also been reimagined. Instead of panels covered with faux leather like before, now there's a molded plastic ceiling with insulation inside. In my opinion, this is incredibly convenient. It doesn't absorb moisture, doesn't sag, doesn't crack, and is easy to clean. Plus, there's real thermal and sound insulation, which is still rare on catamarans. I'll be brief about the furniture. Honestly, it's all a matter of personal taste. Laminated plywood looks nice outdoors until the first rain, then it turns into a layered cake. I prefer plastic, it's practical. Even better is teak or iroko in short natural wood. The guys have a wooden table as standard, for example. There can be a plastic table and the price doesn't change because of it. Now, about panoramic glazing. Well, it has become not just fashionable, it's already an integral element of a modern catamaran, starting from the very, very basic model. It really gives the feeling that you're not in a bunker, but on a boat. But there's an important technical aspect here that few people talk about. Let's imagine what the sun is like. Different coefficients of thermal expansion are a real problem. At 40 degrees, a meter of plexiglass expands by 3 millimeters, while fiberglass only by half a millimeter. And if it heats up to 80 degrees in the sun, which by the way happens, there's a 6 millimeter difference per meter. And in a structure with a single 2-meter glass, that's already a potential gap. I've encountered this in my repair practice. I've already dealt with detachment, or even tearing off of such glass and then searching for the right elastic sealant. Well, that's quite the quest, especially if you're somewhere in Thailand or the Caribbean. In response to auto experts with reglazed sprinters, I'll say right away, no, it's not the same. Metal and fiberglass behave differently. Both the tolerance and the sealants have limits, so the size of the glass matters. Nevertheless, glazing is definitely the right decision. A catamaran without a panoramic view from the cabin in the 2020s is simply, well, nonsense. It doesn't sell. So in this case, let's see how exactly the Laguna engineers handled this. I asked this question at the exhibition, and honestly, the answer completely satisfied me. Vertical windows absorb much less sunlight, and they are also covered by a rather deep visor. In general, what many considered a design flaw has now turned into a huge advantage. I mean this protruding visor over the vertical windows, and other brands won't be able to do the same without it being considered plagiarism, so to speak. Now for Laguna, it's not a bug but a feature. And of course the front netting, they kept it without becoming a complete clone of Bali. I would say that this is where a war of beliefs begins. Fans of Bali, for instance, will say that the front platform is progress, while I will say that the netting is life. Firstly, it's a joy to sleep there. When you're anchored and there's a gentle breeze from below, it's delightful. Secondly, it's the best view of the dolphins, and kids just love hanging out there. And if the kids are occupied, the adults can live peacefully. Thirdly, it's romantic. Fireworks, stars, conversations until dawn. Yes, and sex is still on the table. And basically, the net is easier to maintain, safer in rough waves, and makes it easier to monitor the anchorage. And most importantly, it's a separate zone. There's a cockpit for socializing, loungers on the hard top, mattresses at the bow, and of course, there's the net. This sense of choice and freedom makes the catamaran truly livable. So yes, the Laguna 38 is truly making a comeback as a modern benchmark today. Well, in my opinion, it has truly gathered the best of the old school, added comfort, and technology, removed the unnecessary, and has become exactly what a catamaran of this class should be in 2025. Now let's talk about production technologies. Balsa as a filler has been replaced with a special high-density honeycomb foam with proper molding. This is, let's say, if you want an analogy, it's like modern leggings on girls. You know, the ones where you can see absolutely every detail, where every curve works to their advantage. In catamarans, this filler works the same way. The foam is lightweight, water-resistant, and does not rot, which means the hull becomes stronger, lighter, and more durable. For those who are not familiar, let me explain. The material itself is only half the battle. Now the entire structural framework of the hull and its settings are calculated using digital modeling and then thermoformed. And not only to conveniently arrange the interior, but also to ensure that every partition, every bulkhead, every structural element functions exactly as needed in any conditions. That is, not just by eye as before, but with engineering precision. There will be a separate discussion about this in a dedicated video showcasing the production processes at the shipyards. Because, well, there's a lot to talk about here. This isn't visible from the outside, but it's precisely these things that most often determine how many years a boat will last without surprises. And to be honest, this is even more important than the choice of structural resin. And the resins? Well, yes, they remain polyester. Vinyl ester is better, no question. Less osmosis, more strength, better cross-linking, but it's simply more expensive. If you include it in a practically budget model, you'll end up in a different price category. So Lagoon, like most competitors in this segment, sticks with polyester. They simply improve the technological processes during its molding. By the way, osmosis is also a greatly exaggerated issue which can be very easily managed with timely maintenance work. Now about the electrics and engineering, it's not just wires in a convenient place, it's the design of the entire system at the stage of the 3D model. It's already planned where the route will go, how to install it, where access will be, and how to repair it all later. This greatly reduces the dependency on the human factor. In other words, the chance that someone forgot something somewhere, rushed or neglected something, has become much lower. And finally, sound insulation. On the old 380, it simply wasn't there. Well, not at all. Now in the basic areas under the floor, around the engine compartments and bulkheads, there is added thickening with foam filling. Honestly, I wouldn't say it's as quiet as in a Mercedes, but the difference is noticeable, especially if you used to sail on the old boats. Well, it's like the door in your apartment building. When it slams, you either jump or calmly drink your tea. That's roughly the effect. In short, even if all this seems like trifles, it's precisely these that create the feeling that the boat has become modern. Everything is slightly better, but overall it's a head above. Now let's talk about the most important thing, where we will live. Because a catamaran is not just a boat, it's a home. And even if it's just for a few days, you still want it to be cozy, comfortable, and, well, human-like, so to speak. And I'll say right away, I'm not going to recite the catalog listing, the width of the doors, the height of the cabinets, and the number of light bulbs. All of this is already clear. It's a junior model, and every centimeter counts here. So these brochure phrases like amazingly spacious or comfortable and well thought out interior, well, to be honest, they seem a bit exaggerated. It's understandable that if you've spent the last 5 years in a coma and were brought from the old 380 to the new 38, the wow effect is guaranteed. Because in some places, it was really cramped. And somewhere you even had to enter sideways. Those who have been there will understand. In the new Lagoon 38, everything feels noticeably more spacious. Not in the sense of, oh my god, like in a hotel, but rather more thoughtfully designed. The space has become more logical. Well, it isn't wasted. There's no feeling that each area is competing with the neighboring one for space. Again, the passages and doors are significantly wider. Yes, as before, there's one bathroom per hull. It doesn't matter if it's the charter version with 4 cabins or the owner's version with 3. It's just a limitation of the dimensions. There's nothing you can do about it. But otherwise, the layout is as rational as possible. And here's something specific that has become important to me personally. The windows. The windows in the cabins are really huge. And it's not just bright, it's a delight. You wake up in the morning and see the sea, not a dark wall. It really psychologically changes the whole perception of space. I'm 187 centimeters tall and I didn't have to duck anywhere. Not in the corridors, not in the salon. I could even jump there. Not in the bathroom either. It's a simple fact, but those who are tall know how annoying it is when you hit your forehead on the ceiling every time. Another point is the engines. They are in the aft lockers with access from the outside. This increases comfort in the cabins. It improves sound insulation. Sleeping has actually become quieter, and most importantly, it increases safety. If something goes wrong, you don't need to go inside and take things apart. By the way, this was also the case in the old 380, but back then it was a rarity, and now it's a real standard for almost all manufacturers. Now about the ventilation. Finally, each cabin has a hatch and a porthole. They even installed ventilation mushrooms. Yes, perhaps they spoil the aesthetics, and you can stub your toe on them, especially in the dark. But honestly, these are minor issues because they really work. Mold, stuffiness, and humidity all become things of the past when the air truly circulates. And this is no longer a matter of comfort, but rather of health. About the beds, well, it's a whole different pleasure. No coffin-like spaces, no contortions to get in. Full double beds, both at the bow and the stern. The size is exactly the same as in the larger models. And most importantly, there is headroom. You don't bump your head against the ceiling and don't feel like you're in a compartment. From the outside, you would never guess there's so much space inside. But it's a fact. There really is enough space, and you can feel it. And now, as they say, the floor is my wife's. She doesn't care about sealants or floorboards, but a kitchen with a forward view is her sanctuary. Not everyone thinks about it, but if someone is cooking on the go, looking forward instead of at a bulkhead makes a huge difference, especially if there's a tendency to get seasick. In such a layout, cooking turns from a struggle for survival into an enjoyable process. It's not obvious, of course, but believe me, it's really important. If only the portholes opened outward instead of inward, this catamaran would be priceless. Cabinets and lockers. they are of a normal size. No complaints, not exactly thrilling, but no complaints. The hardware is on par with all modern brands. Here, honestly, it all comes down to personal habits. Personally, I prefer simple and reliable solutions. No buttons, no mechanisms. Just press to close, pull to open, that's it. Fewer moving parts mean fewer problems. In short, inside this catamaran, it's not a technology showcase, but rather a sensible, well-balanced comfort. No showiness, but with an understanding that people on board need not wow, but something convenient, simple, and human-friendly. And here, honestly, Lagoon has hit the mark again. Now let's talk about the bathrooms. To be honest, this is my pain point. I have probably seen and repaired every possible setup that humanity has ever tried to implement in marine toilets. And I can say one thing, everything has finally come to a logical and simple solution. The discharge from the toilet goes directly into the black tank, which is positioned above the waterline and has a gravity drain into the sea without any switches or valves. Everything is reliable, simple, and built to last. The main thing is to maintain it properly. Grey water is also collected in a single mini tank and pumped out through a separate line. And in all of this, it is very important how access to the seacocks, hoses, and connections in the tanks is arranged. The fact that access is right opposite the entrance door is very practical. Often, these access points are made somewhere in the shower or near the toilet, and maneuvering there with my personal size is quite inconvenient. Here, everything is in place, logical, and accessible. Now the engines. The manufacturer took the most sensible and straightforward approach, not to reinvent the wheel, but to use a proven solution. Previously, the standard for catamarans of this size was to install two 20-horsepower engines. Well, standards have increased now, and boats have also grown, by the way. So here there are two Yanmar engines, each with 29 horsepower, complete with the classic SD25 sail drive. And honestly, I can't stop repeating it's wonderful. Why? Because everything is simple, accessible, understandable, and inexpensive. Firstly, no common rail systems, no computer blocks and injections controlled by algorithms from Mars. It's a mechanical distributed injection. Yes, it sounds like something very old, but this is a case where old means reliable. Each cylinder has its own injector, fuel is supplied through an inline high-pressure pump, and everything works mechanically, without the wonders of electronics. Yes, the consumption is slightly higher. Yes, the ecological footprint is not the most pristine. But honestly, if you're buying a catamaran for $350,000, you're unlikely to cry over an extra 100 grams of diesel per hour. Besides, you can start this engine with pliers, even if all the electronics have died. And you can stop it with just your hand. No kidding, I checked. What I don't like is that, structurally, the propellers are positioned behind the rudder blades, not in front of them. And this has carried over from the old version as well. I understand that on a catamaran with mechanically linked rudders, it simply can't be done otherwise. Therefore, I immediately inform newcomers, you'll have to maneuver in the marina using the engines, not the steering wheel. Those who don't know how will learn. It's really not difficult, it just requires getting used to it. I was also very pleased with the Lagoon in terms of maintenance and repair. As I mentioned before, the engine is placed in a separate aft locker, not under the bed like in some nightmares of the modern fleet. You maintain it without bothering anyone, without making a mess in the cabin, and without breathing diesel in the bedroom. The access is excellent again, everything is visible, and you can reach everything. The compartment itself is sealed, and even if the membrane breaks and starts flooding, the water won't rise above the crankcase. This is purely due to the buoyancy of the other compartments, which are completely separated. Plus, if necessary, you can remove the sail drive right on the water. This is done very simply. Just load the bow of the opposite float and that's it. Very practical. Now the control. It's completely mechanical using cables. No electronic joysticks. Pure honest connection with the machine. Instant response, predictable handling. Yes, of course, a beginner might give too sharp a reverse, especially in a panic. But that's a matter of skill. And if something does break, having a spare cable on board, one for the left and one for the right engine, that's it, and there's your solution. Such a cable costs, by the way, about $50 on a market day. Again, spare parts are available everywhere. Services, well, those two. One mechanic can easily maintain a fleet of 20 catamarans with such engines. And this is important, especially for charter companies. There is, of course, an opinion that charter operators should only be serviced by certified services. But that's a topic for a separate video, I think. And most importantly, the price. Such an engine in the USA costs less than $3,000. Yes, without taxes, yes, without shipping, but still it's a joke compared to the prices of advanced motors with electronics. The propellers, by the way, are well designed. On the port side, there's a left propeller, on the starboard side, a right propeller. This is intuitive and helps when maneuvering in reverse as it compensates for the stern swing. I've seen boats where there were two identical propellers. Apparently, so that the captain doesn't relax, I don't know. Now about the rudders, they are mechanical. No hydraulics, no desynchronization, like for example on the Nautitech. The steering wheel is also rigidly connected to the rudder blades, and the blades are rigidly connected to each other with an aluminum tube. Yes, I understand this imposes some design limitations, but overall, I don't see a problem. And if the designer has laid out the channels in advance with no shortcomings in the hull's rigidity, then this is the most reliable design. I mean, if the hull doesn't twist or warp, and it also has feedback, meaning from the rudder blades to the steering wheel, and all yachtsmen really love this. No, of course, I'm not saying that hydraulics are bad, but in terms of maintenance and repairs, they are significantly more expensive. Plus, I've come across defects in the cylinders, hoses, the mechanical pump, and of course, the incompetence of those who attempted to repair it. To be honest, I was also incompetent and couldn't figure out why the oil was foaming and not working. However, implementing any designer whims with hydraulics is much easier. So let's be honest. If I were designing such a catamaran for charter myself, I would choose almost the same solutions. Now, the sails. I really love it when everything works automatically, and I'll say right away, that's not going to be the case here. Although the designers, of course, tried their best and got the most out of the boat. Again, all in favor of the size. I think the technical assignment was something like, make it so that any one-armed person with a disability could operate this boat alone. And a couple of notes like, to make it as safe as possible and for the boat to be the fastest in its class. In the end, it turned out the way it did. The standard comes with a classic lowering mainsail with a square top. The area is about 56 square meters and a small automatic jib, really small, at 22 square meters. And optionally, you can also purchase a Code Zero at 54 square meters. But here we immediately deviate from the first point of the technical assignment. Because in fact, this whole contraption really doesn't require a second person with the stock sails without this Code Zero. All the rigging is led to one winch and is very intuitive. That is, there isn't even a second winch at the helm, and you can sail without it entirely. Let's now talk about specific solutions to make it a bit clearer. So, the jib will definitely be automatic, that's not up for discussion. The boat was designed for single-handed sailing, with the option to hand over control to the autopilot. And since that's the case, its size, purely due to the size of the boat, cannot be large. In our case, it's 22 square meters because it's automatic, and for a 10-ton boat, that's very, very small. The days are gone when you could just unfurl the jib and take off. Yes, to be honest, on catamarans, such times never really existed. A catamaran has always sailed much more stably under the mainsail, next to the mainsail. So, at first glance, there's a simple choice, classic or in-mast furling. This is what I'm explaining, what the manufacturers thought. Both technologies are well developed and reliable. But among yachtsmen, there are legends about a jammed sail. I wouldn't pay attention to them, but I would focus on maximum sail area with a minimal mast. And here, a classic mainsail, especially one trimmed at the top, easily outperforms any furling system. The difference is measured not in percentages but in multiples. And so I personally, you as an engineer, sit down and think, okay, a self-tacking jib will be like a rag 22 meters in-mast furling, another rag 30 meters. So in total, how should this boat perform? You either need to significantly lengthen the mast, add spreaders, complicate the structure, because the mast is already over 18 meters. If you make it 20 meters, you'll exceed the size limits for many bridges and greatly reduce passive safety. Well, either we give up on the in-mast furling and go for the classic setup. Yes, reefing involves additional rigging. Yes, opening and stowing the sail is a procedure, but otherwise, with an autopilot and one hand, there are no issues, we can manage. So the choice is obvious. By the way, for those who really need in-mast furling, here's an option for a mainsail furling system for $18,000, which isn't too expensive considering the total cost of the yacht. I would of course recommend adding an electric winch to the base package. Then the issue would resolve itself. But it's not included, it's an option. In fact, I'm just theorizing and going on about it unnecessarily. This mainsail shape is practically the calling card of all Lagoon 380s. And now it's almost standard for everyone in this class. The only problem was the boom sheet, which was dangling at the stern. But then the guys from Beneteau came and said, we have a time-tested solution. A triangular rigging with attachment on the hardtop. Nothing flaps, all the ropes are visible. And no channels are needed. And most importantly, you can lower the boom as much as possible, and it won't sway even in rough seas. This means you can conveniently take out and stow the sail. 2 steps, and you're already walking on the hardtop, working, closing, opening. By the way, again about the hardtop, the base model assumes that you will install solar panels, and there is a special place for them with complete wiring and brackets. And yes, the panels themselves are an option, but in the modern world it's more like a choice without a choice. When you already have a relaxation area at the front of the hardtop and a panel area at the back with proper passages for working with the sail, it gives you butterflies in your stomach. Now about the rigging, tackle and other ropes, everything here is extremely simple. And to be honest, that's how it should be. The perimeter is protected by stainless steel. Everything is standard. Lifelines, railings, stanchions, all sturdy, welded neatly with the bow and stern covered. I tried aluminum on other boats, and it didn't work for me at all. Light but soft, dense bends loses shape from accidental impact or overload. Mast, boom, rollers, stoppers, all from top manufacturers, all familiar. No surprises, no exotic solutions. And that's good. As they say, if you're really unlucky, you might get a defect, but in 90% of cases, all this serves the boat for a lifetime without issues, even with charter use. Believe me, ropes are consumables, but they are a real pleasure. Firstly, they are all colorful. It's a small thing, but really convenient and a big plus for safety, especially if someone on board is a beginner or you have a rotating crew, because you can immediately see where everything goes. Secondly, it's an excellent solution to secure the boom sheet rollers with a soft Dyneema loop. Previously, rigid metal brackets were often used. Yes, with other manufacturers they remain the same, and during jerks they would either break off or damage the mounting point. But here, everything is absorbed, works quietly, and doesn't transmit impact to the structure. In general, it's a small thing, but pleasant and very well thought out from an engineering perspective. Now about the fluids. 400 liters of diesel and 300 liters of water, but optionally it can be extended to 500. I would without hesitation go for 500. Although the boat is small, people use the same amount of water. In fact, having such large tanks is really cool. And I understand that the designers had to work hard to increase the load capacity from 2 to 3 tons. I won't explain further. I think you understand everything yourself. In fact, it's such an inconspicuous number, but it will greatly affect the comfort of your life on the boat. Again, for example, in charter use, it's not as important. And finally, a bit about the numbers, which, strangely enough, say more than it seems at first glance. Let's move on to the main dimensions and hull contours. So, the hull length is 11.38 meters. The width is 6.65 and the draft is 1.26. At the same time, the displacement is 10.2 tons. This is in the standard configuration. Let's think about what this means in practice. And let's break it down because literally everything is important here. So let's count on our fingers. First, the cost of mooring in marinas. This is the part that is usually forgotten on shore but remembered very quickly on the water. Up to 12 meters is one price category. After 12, it's a completely different one. And here, the Lagoon 38 hits the sweet spot. Maximum capabilities in a hull that, according to the documents, is still under 12 meters. That is, you save on mooring, docking, and even some fees in European marinas. And the difference can be really noticeable, especially if you're staying for a month rather than just a couple of days. Next, the second point, stability. A width of 665 to a length of 1138. This is a very respectable ratio. This is in regard to comfort and safety. You have a good stability lever, thanks to which the catamaran stands confidently on the water and doesn't make sharp turns with every gust. What does this mean? It means that in light winds, it's simply pleasant to live on board, and in strong winds, you're not afraid that the boat will behave like, like a water trampoline or something. Plus, the wider the boat, the less it rocks. And this is not only about safety, but also about the basic comfort of all passengers, especially those who don't handle seasickness well. Next, the third point is load capacity. 12 tons of displacement and 3 tons of cargo. How much is that? Well, it depends on what you're comparing it to. For a boat up to 12 meters, that's a heck of a lot. This means you can live on board, not just travel light. Water, fuel, people, provisions, toys, gear, all sorts of just-in-case boxes. And yet the hull doesn't sink down to the ears. In other words, the boat doesn't lose maneuverability and speed. That's important. Next, the fourth point, passability and draft. Well, 1.26 meters is far from 2 meters. That's practically a gift. You can enter shallow marinas, pass through sandbars, wander through the miles of northern seas, anchor almost right at the beach and not be afraid. And this is especially valuable if you don't want to limit yourself to deep water charters only. Another point, the fifth, speed. And here's the most interesting part, because from the side, the catamaran looks like a little truck. And with such displacement and relatively short floats, what can you expect in terms of speed? But honestly, I took a close look at the shape of the hull, and here's what I noticed. With minimal load, the displacement actually decreases and the hull sits higher. In this position, the floats appear visually narrower, and everything looks much sportier. But the trick isn't even in that. There is a horizontal flat part on the bottom, which at a certain speed starts to function like a semi-planing hull. I came across the term self-unloading displacement hull somewhere. And it doesn't mean that the boat will plane like a motorboat, but dynamically it slightly lifts, the wet surface decreases, and as a result the speed increases with less effort. So think about it. Next, the sixth point is sailing in different conditions, and if it really works as I assume, then on side courses such geometry significantly reduces the risk of the leeward side being submerged, and with following winds it provides a gentle glide. Let's say it adds +1 to speed but +10 to enjoyment. Inside, thanks to these extended floats and the flat upper deck, the living space is simply enormous for this size. So with all these semi-planing features, you no longer sacrifice comfort. In general, formally the numbers are just numbers, but in fact it's a really smartly balanced vessel that operates in different modes, allows you to live rather than endure, and offers wide navigation possibilities. Can it be fast? Well, only practice will show, but there's definitely a chance it will succeed, and that's encouraging. Now let's talk about navigation and electronics. No fluff, just facts and a few of my comments. Here's what's included as standard: a Raymarine plotter display installed right at the helm, a Raymarine hydraulic autopilot, and a plastic magnetic compass. There's also remote control for the anchor winch. And some minor things, but they're not very important. Yes, I understand that this isn't a premium set from the future, but these are modern, reliable devices that fully cover all basic tasks. The screen works even with wet fingers, which, as you know, is no small thing on the water. The interface is intuitive, with no archaic menus or scrolling through a bunch of windows. Everything is clear and works without any magic tricks. The equipment is built on the Seatalk NG bus, which is essentially Raymarine's proprietary version of NMEA 2000. And this means that you can easily connect any modern sensors and modules to it. Well, in case you ever want to upgrade something. There are radars, AIS, a weather receiver, or for example, a module for sail management. Then there's support for charts and routes. Cartography is available from CMAP and Navionics. Everything is top-notch and regularly updated. And all of this can be synchronized with a tablet or phone. In practice, it looks like this. You're sitting at home on your couch, plotting a route, for example, along the Croatian coast. Then you synchronize it with the plotter via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, connect the track mode, and the boat will follow the route on its own without your involvement. The autopilot will take into account drift, leeway, and current. Well, everything you need, in short, to avoid drifting off to the shores of Algeria. Obviously, under sail, everything is a bit more complicated, but with proper setup and experience, you can configure automatic tacks. Not a rocket, of course, but it works. Now, what is missing? Again, radar, AIS, but all of this can be connected without any problems. If you add both, and ideally also Starlink, you get an almost autonomous system capable of not only seeing other vessels, but also automatically avoiding them. In the modern world, I firmly believe that in the coming years, all these maneuvers will be handed over to artificial intelligence, and the boat will communicate directly with others like it, without the captain's involvement. Well, for now, of course, we are learning, keeping our hands on the wheel and looking ahead. Now about the electrics on board. The configuration is quite transparent and honest. The control panel is digital with automatic circuit breakers. Makes sense, right? No need to mess around with fuses, all that stuff from the last century. The network includes 12 volts and 220 volts with shore power connection and outlets throughout the cabin. The batteries basically with starter batteries in the engine compartment, 2 at 110 amp hours, and service batteries, 2 at 140 amp hours, AGM, so say reliable, non-acid, non-lithium. The charger is a standard Crystec 40 amp. In my opinion, it's a powerful enough unit that quickly raises the charge level, and if you're on shore power or using a generator, you won't have to wait long to charge the batteries. By the way, there's one oddity. The inverter is not included in the base configuration, and there's not even any preparation for its installation. So if you want one, you can install it, but be prepared to run wires and set everything up from scratch. This is at least inconvenient, especially considering that there is already 220 volts from the shore on board. It would be more logical to at least include passive wiring and a basic automatic switch, so that you could switch the inverter to shore power. There are no solar panels either. But as I mentioned before, the base is prepared for them, and you can purchase them as an option. By the way, I walked on what they offer. I literally stepped on it with my feet, and the impressions are mixed. The panel is ribbed and non-slip. It seems great, but cleaning them from dust and salt in the open sea is quite a task. If anyone has thoughts on this, share them in the comments. The energy capacity is more than enough for living in a marina or a regular week-long charter. However, if you want to live autonomously, you'll need to boost the service bank. There is, of course, space for this. You can connect, but whether it's necessary is a matter of habits. Some people live with one light bulb, while others install 2 refrigerators, a freezer, a coffee machine, and a multi-cooker. The main thing is to understand your own scenario. Next, about the build quality. The electronics are reliable in themselves, especially Raymarine. But how it is mounted is another question. And here everything depends on the quality of work at the shipyard. The Seatalk NG bus is indeed stable. You screw it in, and that's it. But the other contacts, terminals, connectors, all of this can be assembled either excellently or haphazardly. It depends on the staff, the regulations, and of course the country where it's assembled. Here arises the uncomfortable question: where exactly was your boat assembled? European factories have quality control, technological maps, and a long-standing culture of quality. But if the assembly is moved somewhere to Africa, then high staff turnover, low qualifications, and weak control can play a cruel joke. This is not bias, it's simply experience. I hope everyone understands that everything related to electronics and electrics is not just extras and bonuses, but the foundation of safety, autonomy, and convenience. And here Lagoon approached it quite rationally. They included everything necessary in the base to set sail, plan a route, and not get lost. They left space and compatibility for upgrades, and if you don't want more, then you don't need it. They created a clear and simple system that can be maintained and improved by yourself, without calling in specialists for some unknown costs. And to be honest, I would certainly add a couple of batteries, maybe an inverter, perhaps a solar panel, but the basic set is already respectable. And it's not an empty shell like some competitors, but rather a fully functional tool for those who want to, let's say, not suffer, but actually set sail. It might actually seem like I'm overly enthusiastic about Laguna. Calm down. Forget it. Honestly, I don't care about the brand. And I'm not a Laguna fanboy. I just genuinely like the combination of solutions in this model. No excess, no showiness. Just smart, reliable, and to the point. Everything was fitted into minimal dimensions without losing comfort. And believe me, that's not often found in lower-end models. At the same time, I confidently state they have no breakthrough in the industry. On the contrary, you are lagging behind and catching up with all your might. The market is full of analogs, and the niche is quite tightly occupied. In short, it's not a revolution, it's a logical development of a successful model. It's a pity that it's so late, of course. Now an important point, the price. It currently starts at 340,000 euros. And that's without VAT, without options. Just the boat on the water. Some might say expensive. And now let's look back, retrospectively, at how much its predecessors cost. Well, I mean the same 38s. But let's look at this. What was the real price and what was the inflation? Because this is very, very important. You should never look at it in absolute terms. So let's say now it's 2025, 340,000. That's 340,000 as of today. In 2019, it was 350,000 at base, but adjusted for inflation, it's already 405,000, almost 406. I will round to the nearest thousand. Next, 2013, 280,000, and that's 376,000. In 2000, it was 230,000, and that's 426,000. So, practically at the beginning of its existence, the boat was 100,000 more expensive than it is now. And you understand, right? The new model is objectively better, cheaper, if you account for inflation. The boat has become much more technologically advanced, convenient, and safer. And this, frankly, is a very rare case in the market overall, when the market offers more for less money. So think about it, and I'll talk about profitability. So I'll tell you why this model was loved and why it was a clear and justified purchase. Profitability. It exclusively depends on how exactly you will use it. But in any case, with a commercial approach, the actual payback period is somewhere between 4 to 5 years. And for a boat with such a level of comfort and a recognizable brand, this is a very, very, very good result. Here are two options for simple monetization models. First option, a catamaran managed by a charter company with an average occupancy of about 26 weeks a year and an average price of 4,000 to 5,000 euros per week. Gross revenue, well up to 130,000 euros per year. Minus commission, maintenance, depreciation, you are left with approximately 60,000 to 80,000 euros net. Payback period, you understand, right? 4.5 to 5 years. There you go. Second option, you are the captain yourself and sell spots in tours. You sell by cabins, for example. During the season, it's 800 euros per person per week. Off-season, 500. There are 8 passengers on board, 4 cabins with 2 people each. The season is 16 weeks. The off-season is 10 weeks. I'm taking the minimum here because in reality, people work on their boats even in winter. Gross revenue, well, let's calculate. In total, approximately 132,000 plus euros per year. The payback period is already 3 years. Yes, of course, you'll have to work there, be on board, maintain the boat, but financially, it's very efficient, especially if you live on board and minimize all expenses. We understand what all this fuss was about, right? The Lagoon 38 Modern from the year 2025. It's not a revolution, but it's a very good, honest, well thought out catamaran with standard equipment, good engineering, a reasonable price, and a quite understandable model of operation, one whether for personal use or commercial rental. And finally, an important point, especially for those who are sitting and thinking, maybe I should really get a catamaran. Well, any of the new Lagoons, including the very same 38 model we just talked about in detail, can be purchased through me. Oh, everyone wondered why I was going on about all this, but no, that's not why. It won't just be a sale, like here's the invoice, and then you're on your own. Go to the dealer. No, it will be a complete guided journey from the first question to the first voyage at sea. I will fully assist, selecting the right model based on your needs, whether it's for charter, family, or around-the-world trip. I will also help you understand the real differences in configurations and avoid overpaying for things you don't need. I'll organize a trip to the shipyard so you can personally touch, feel, walk around the boat, and ask any questions about its construction. And most importantly, I'll advise you on where and how best to place the boat in charter if you want it to start working and paying off. I have reliable charter operators with honest schemes and real cases with numbers. In short, everything is transparent, without pressure and marketing fog or any dubious explanations. Just a normal, straightforward conversation about a real purchase. So if you're thinking about it and don't know where to start, just write to me. I'll help. And if you just found it interesting, then give it a like, subscribe, and definitely share this video with someone who has long dreamed of life under sail. See you